Her boots left prints in the dirt road as she stepped off the wagon, one hand gripping the strap of her worn satchel. Aloan McBride hadn't planned to end up in a place like Deadwood Gulch. But when hunger and winter came too early to the Dakota Plains, a girl didn't have much say in where life sent her. She was too thin, with a quiet face and eyes that stayed watchful. The kind of woman folks passed on the street without a second look, until she spoke. Then they paused, because Eloan had a voice like warm coffee, steady, calm, with something deep underneath it, like she'd seen things and survived them. The ad in the Trading Post window had said help wanted, housekeeper, remote cabin, good pay. That was all it took. Eloan had cleaned worse for less. The wagon driver, a man with more silence than teeth, nodded toward the ridge ahead. That's his place. You'll find it. She did. Eventually, the trail climbed into thick pine, cold air sinking through her coat. And when she reached the top, there it was, an old ranch house set alone on the bluff, looking like it had been carved out of grief. Paint peeled. The porch sagged. One shutter hung crooked like a broken arm. Eloan stopped at the gate and took a breath. A wind blew through the trees behind her, and still she hesitated. Inside, she wasn't sure what she expected. Not him. He opened the door like he didn't want to, like the act of welcoming someone was something painful. He was tall, maybe in his mid-30s, built like he'd once worked the land hard and then stopped. His face looked carved from stone. Cold gray eyes, jaw covered in stubble. His shirt was half-buttoned, and even though the house behind him looked dark and still, she caught the sharp scent of whiskey in the air. You the girl they sent? His voice was hoarse. I'm Aloha McBride. Came about the cleaning job. He didn't nod, just stepped aside. Don't go upstairs. It wasn't a question. She walked in. The cabin was a mess. Dust clung to every surface. Dishes stacked high. Curtains shut tight like the house didn't want light anymore. And the air, it wasn't just the smell of booze and neglect. It was something heavier. Grief hung there, thick and quiet, like someone had died and never left. I can start in the kitchen, she said. He grunted. Name's Jack. She didn't ask for more. By nightfall, her fingers were raw from scrubbing. Jack hadn't said another word. He sat at the kitchen table while she worked, drinking from a tin cup and watching the wall. Not her or the wall, as if there was something he was trying to remember and couldn't, or something he couldn't forget. Eloan cleaned quietly, not wanting to spook the moment. But as she worked, her eyes kept drifting to the stairs. Don't go upstairs, he'd said. She hadn't planned to, but it gnawed at her. What was up there? What was he hiding? She didn't ask. Not then. That night, she slept in the shed behind the house. The cot creaked with every breath she took. There were holes in the roof where the stars showed through. She wrapped herself in an old quilt and listened to the wind howl through the trees. And somewhere in the distance, she thought she heard a scream. In the morning, she asked Jack if he had coffee. He pointed at the tin can on the shelf, but didn't say a word. 3 days passed. Eloan worked room by room. Jack stayed quiet. He didn't leave the house. Didn't talk. Sometimes, she caught him standing still at the bottom of the stairs, looking up like he wanted to climb, but couldn't. She never said anything, but she noticed. Then on the 5th day, she found the letter. It was tucked behind the pantry shelf, fallen between the boards. The envelope was yellow with age, corners torn. Her fingers itched to open it, but she didn't. She left it where she found it. That night, Jack spoke. She was 5. He said out of nowhere, voice so quiet she almost missed it, like to brave flowers in her mother's hair. Said the stars were angels. Eloan froze mid-scrub, her back to him. She died in that room upstairs, he said, and I wasn't there. Eloan didn't ask what happened. Didn't need to. Grief had its own way of curling around a man. Jack was drowning in it. In the morning, Eloan opened the windows. Let light back in. Jack didn't stop her. She baked bread with what she found in the cupboard. He didn't eat it. But on the 7th day, he said her name. Not the girl, not you, but Eloan. And something in her chest moved. He was broken. That much was clear. But not beyond fixing. Grief didn't erase a man. It just hollowed him out. Aloan knew that kind of emptiness. She'd seen it in her mother's eyes after her brother died. She'd seen it in the mirror after the fire that took everything. That night, she left a candle burning in the kitchen. Jack didn't put it out. The days stretched long. She cleaned. He sat. Then one morning, she found him outside, chopping wood. Shirt soaked in sweat, breath rising like smoke in the cold. He didn't look at her, but he was moving, living. Firewood was running low, he said, like it was nothing. But it wasn't. Aloan watched him carry the pieces inside, stacking them with slow care. Something had shifted. Later that evening, as she washed dishes, Jack leaned against the doorframe and said, "You remind me of her. Not in the way you look. Just something quiet." Aloan wiped her hands. "I'm not her. I'm just trying to help." He nodded once, slowly. "Maybe that's worse." The next morning, the stairs creaked. Jack had gone up. When he came down, his hands were shaking. He didn't say why, just sat at the table and stared at the floor. But that night, he said thank you. Not for anything in particular, just thank you. And Aloan sat across from him and nodded. Because sometimes healing didn't come loud. Sometimes it came in whispers, in clean dishes, in candlelight, in silence that no longer felt empty, and in a man remembering how to breathe. Aloan hadn't asked about Jack's past, but the house whispered pieces of it anyway. It was in the way the upstairs door stayed shut, always, as if even the air behind it carried too much pain. It was in the photograph tucked in the bookshelf, a faded image of a woman with bright eyes and a child on her hip, both laughing like the world was still kind. Aloan dusted around it, but never moved it. Some things were sacred. One morning, nearly 2 weeks after she'd arrived, she spotted a figure on horseback coming up the ridge. Jack was outside chopping wood, and he stilled the moment he saw the rider. The man dismounted slowly, wearing a dark coat and a weather-beaten face, the kind you remembered for the wrong reasons. Aloan stepped onto the porch as Jack walked forward without a word. "Didn't think I'd see you again," Jack said, his voice clipped. The man spit into the dirt. "Didn't come for you. Sheriff sent me up to check. Said there was rumors you were losing your mind." Jack's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. The man looked past him at Aloan. "So this the girl?" "She's the housekeeper. Pretty one." Jack stepped between them. "She's working. You said your piece, now go." The man, later Aloan would learn his name was Calix Garrison, just gave a slow grin. "You bury a wife and daughter, and now you're out here playing house with some stray? Hell, Jack, maybe it's true you have gone soft." That night, Jack didn't speak, just sat by the fire, staring into the flames like they held answers. Aloan didn't push. She knew what shame could do to a person. But Calix's words stuck, not because they were true, but because Jack feared they might be. The next day, Aloan found herself drawn toward the town of Deadwood. She hadn't been back since the day she arrived. Jack handed her a few coins without asking questions. She walked the 3 miles alone. The town was small but busy. Children ran past with sticks, and women haggled over fabric in the general store. Aloan bought flour, salt, and matches. But before she could head back, a young girl, no older than 12, ran up to her. "You're the one who worked for Jack Colton, ain't you?" Aloan blinked. "I cleaned for him, yes." The girl grinned. "Mama says he's haunted, that the baby's ghost still cries upstairs." Aloan's stomach turned. "That's not a kind thing to say." The girl shrugged. "Don't matter if it's kind. It's true." Aloan left in silence. The walk home felt longer. She kept glancing back, as if the rumors might chase her up the trail. Jack didn't ask what she'd heard. But that evening, he surprised her by handing her an old journal. Its leather cover was cracked, pages yellowed with time. "She wrote it," he said. "My wife. Her name was Eliza." Aloan took it carefully. She didn't read it that night. She sat on the shelf. But knowing it was there changed something. It made Eliza real. Later that week, the first snowfall came. Aloan was sweeping the front steps when she saw the young boy standing at the edge of the trees. He was barefoot, hair a mess, clothes too thin. She called out, but he ran. She told Jack about him. He looked out into the pines and nodded once. That's Tommy Crow. Who is he? His father works the mines. Beats him sometimes. Sometimes worse. Eloan didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, she left bread wrapped in cloth on the stump near the trees. It was gone by afternoon. The day after that, a small tin of buttons disappeared. By the third morning, Eloan found a pine cone left in their place. Guess we got ourselves a visitor, she said lightly to Jack. He didn't smile, but his voice softened. He won't come close until he knows it's safe. Then we wait. The day slowed again, but something had shifted. Eloan was no longer just scrubbing floors. She was part of the house now. Jack asked her questions sometimes, small things. Did she have family? Why'd she leave Kansas? Eloan answered in pieces. My brother died in a fire, she said one night. We were both inside. I got out. He didn't. Jack stared at the floor. That why you came west? She nodded. Didn't feel like home anymore. He didn't say sorry. He didn't have to. As winter deepened, so did their bond. Jack started eating at the table again. Sometimes they spoke late into the night. Not about anything heavy, just simple things. The way the trees looked under snow. How Eliza used to sing to their daughter before bed. Eloan found herself smiling more. Then one morning, a letter came. The mailman left it in the box at the end of the ridge. Jack didn't open it for hours. When he did, his face went pale. It's from Eliza's sister, he said. She's coming. Eloan's chest tightened. Why now? Says she heard I was keeping the house closed up. Says she's worried I've gone mad. When will she be here? Jack looked at the snow falling outside. 2 days. Eloan didn't sleep that night. She wasn't sure why it unsettled her. She had no claim to Jack, no right to feel anything. But it felt like something might end when that woman arrived. The next morning, Jack went upstairs. Eloan heard the door creak open, then silence. When he came down, his hands were covered in dust. He didn't look at her, just went outside and chopped wood for hours. Eloan, for the first time, opened Eliza's journal. She read until the candle burned low. Eliza had been bright, fierce, funny. She wrote about Jack with love that seeped through every page. Their daughter, Hope, had been a whirlwind, barefoot, wild-haired, always asking questions. The entry stopped suddenly in late October. One half-finished line. No goodbye. Eloan closed the journal and sat in the silence. The next day, the sister arrived. Her name was Margaret, and she was everything Eloan wasn't. Sharp-dressed, sure-footed, and not afraid to speak her mind. This place looks like a grave, she said as soon as she stepped inside. Eloan bristled. Jack stayed quiet. Margaret eyed Eloan. You work here? Yes, ma'am. More than that, I guess. You sleeping out back? Eloan didn't answer. Margaret turned to Jack. You need help, not company. You're stuck, Jack. This house is a shrine. Jack didn't flinch. That's my choice. She want you to move on. Eloan stood. Sometimes healing doesn't mean forgetting. Margaret stared hard at her. You think you know him? You've been here a month. I was there when Eliza died. Eloan's throat tightened. Then you know what he lost. That night, Eloan sat in the shed again, under the same torn roof, but she couldn't sleep. The wind howled louder than before. She thought of Hope's room, of Jack upstairs, maybe opening the window for the first time in years. And she wondered, could something broken ever be whole again, or did it just learn how to carry its cracks better? The boy, Tommy, returned that night. Eloan found him curled on the porch at dawn, shaking. She woke Jack, who didn't hesitate. They brought the boy inside, wrapped him in quilts, fed him broth. He didn't speak, just stare at the floor. When Margaret saw him, she frowned. You've turned the place into a halfway house. Jack looked her in the eye. Maybe it was always meant to be. Eloan watched the boy sleeping beside the fire, his chest rising slow and steady. And she knew something had changed. The house wasn't just mourning anymore. It was breathing again. And for the first time, Eloan felt like she belonged somewhere. Not as a guest, not as help, but as someone needed. Snow piled higher along the ridge with each passing day. But inside the house, a strange warmth had taken hold. Not just from the firewood Jack chopped, but from the slow, fragile things beginning to grow between all of them. The silence that had once lived like a ghost in the cabin had softened. Sometimes Aloan would hum as she cleaned. Sometimes Jack would watch her without looking away. And the boy, Tommy, who once flinched at every sound, had started to follow her from room to room, mimicking her sweeping or sitting quietly nearby with his legs tucked under him like a stray pup afraid to belong. Aloan began teaching him how to read. They sat on the floor by the hearth, her finger guiding his under simple words, cat, door, snow. He didn't say much, but his eyes followed hers with a quiet hunger, like he'd been waiting his whole life for someone to notice him. One afternoon, Jack stood at the doorway and watched them. Aloan didn't look up, but she could feel his gaze like sunlight through the window. He hadn't spoken to Tommy yet. Not really, but something about the way he watched him now said more than words could. A man with no children left in the world, looking at a boy who had no home. Jack started eating dinner at the table again. Not just bread and beans, but the stew Aloan made from scratch, the warm cornbread she pulled from the oven. He'd never complimented, but he kept coming back for seconds. Some nights, he even told stories, simple ones about growing up on the prairie, about how his father used to cut fence wire with his bare hands, or how he once tried to ride a bull to impress Eliza. Aloan listened, not because the stories were special, but because his voice came alive in them. He didn't sound like a man grieving. He sounded like someone remembering how to live. And in the quiet spaces between chores and meals, Aloan and Jack started sharing small pieces of themselves. He told her how Eliza had hated the sound of clocks ticking, so they'd never own one. Aloan told him about her brother, how he used to whistle the same tune every time he walked through the door, and how that silence had echoed louder than anything after he was gone. They didn't cry, didn't touch, but every word exchanged was like a brick set in something new, something steady and invisible between them. One morning, Aloan stepped out to gather kindling and found Jack already there, stacking logs in the sled. He handed her a pair of gloves without speaking. As they worked together, their movements synced, their breath visible in the cold, their shoulders brushing sometimes without awkwardness. Later, when they returned to the porch, she noticed he'd fixed the broken step. He didn't mention it, but she saw his hands were scraped, and she understood. He was trying, in his own quiet way, to build again. Tommy had begun to sleep through the night, curled up in a small cot Jack helped build. Some nights, Aloan found the boy holding a wooden figure Jack had carved. A little horse, simple and rough. Jack said nothing about it, just left it on the windowsill one morning and walked away. But Aloan had seen the way the boy's fingers clutched it in sleep. A gift without words. A memory passed from one wounded soul to another. When Margaret announced she was leaving, the house felt strangely still again. She packed with tight movements, her mouth pressed into a hard line. Aloan helped her without comment, sensing Margaret's storm of judgment had dimmed, but not passed. "You care for him?" Margaret asked quietly as she tied her last bag. Aloan paused. "He doesn't need someone to care for him. He needs someone who doesn't expect him to be the man he was before." Margaret studied her for a moment. "Eliza would have liked you. You listen." And then she was gone. Her absence left room for something else to breathe. That week, Aloan found Jack repairing the railing on the porch. When she asked what prompted it, he just shrugged. "You said it wobbled." Small things began to shift more quickly after that. Jack began rising early again, sometimes before sunrise, to fetch water or tend to the horses. Aloan often found the fire already lit when she woke. She began leaving biscuits wrapped in cloth on Tommy's bed, and in return, he drew her pictures, stick-figured families with a tall man, a woman with a braid, and a boy holding hands with both. One night, as snow fell in heavy silence, Jack stood at the foot of the stairs, staring up again. Aloan didn't move. She knew what he was thinking. "I used to sit outside that door," he said. "Just sit. Couldn't go in. Couldn't walk away either." Aloan stepped beside him. "You don't have to go in. Not all at once." He looked at her then, his eyes clearer than she'd ever seen. but I think I want to." They went together. The room was small, untouched, dust curled in the air. A child's blanket still folded neatly on the bed. Toys arranged in a line on the shelf. Tom had stopped here years ago. Jack reached down and picked up a small wooden comb. His hand trembled. Eloan touched his arm. Not pulling, not pushing. Just there. He didn't cry, but his breath hitched like someone who hadn't drawn a full breath in years. That night, he sat by the fire with the journal in his lap. He didn't read aloud, but when Eloan walked past, he said, "She wrote about how scared she was. Not of dying, but of me forgetting what Hope's laugh sounded like." Eloan sat beside him. "You didn't forget. You just couldn't bear to remember." The silence stretched, warm and long. When Tommy wandered out half asleep and curled between them, Jack didn't move. He just laid a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. As the days passed, the connection between them deepened. Eloan caught Jack watching her when she sang while sweeping, or when she brushed Tommy's hair behind his ear. Once she laughed at something the boy said, and Jack smiled, a real smile. Not forced, not tired, but it wasn't all peace. Some nights, Jack still woke in a sweat, staring at the ceiling like he was back in some moment he couldn't escape. Eloan didn't ask. She just poured him water and sat beside him until the tremors passed. Tommy had nightmares too. Eloan woke once to find him standing by her cot, shaking. She took his hand and led him back to his bed, staying with him until dawn. In the morning, Jack found them both asleep on the floor. He covered them with a blanket without saying a word. Spring crept in slow, like it wasn't sure if it was welcome. The snow softened. Birds returned. The trees took on the early hints of green. Eloan started keeping the windows open during the day. Tommy ran outside barefoot one morning, and Jack didn't stop him. Eloan planted flowers out front. Wild seed she'd saved from town. Jack watched her from the porch, then came down and helped. When the first bud pushed through the dirt, Tommy clapped and named it Hope. One afternoon, Jack rode into town for supplies. Eloan didn't realize how quiet the house had become until he was gone. When he returned, he brought her a red scarf from the general store. He didn't say why, just handed it to her and walked inside. But her fingers clutched it tighter than she meant to, and her heart beat louder than it had in a long while. That evening, they sat outside watching the sun melt behind the ridge. Tommy lay stretched out on the steps, drowsy. Jack turned to Eloan and said softly, "You saved me." Eloan shook her head. "No, I didn't. I just saw you." He didn't speak after that, just reached over, slow and unsure, and took her hand. Not a promise. Not yet, but something close. And Eloan didn't let go. Spring brought color back to the land, but inside the house, old shadows stirred. The warmth between Eloan and Jack, once quiet and steady, began to crack under the weight of what hadn't been said. Eloan noticed it first, not in anything Jack did, but in what he didn't. He stopped telling stories at the table. He stopped coming to the fire after supper. He spent more time in the shed or out on the ridge, away from her and Tommy. When she asked if something was wrong, he just gave her a tired smile and said, "I've got work." But the work was a shield. Eloan knew it. He was pulling away, not fast, not loud, but enough to chill the corners of what had been growing between them. She tried to reach him through small things. A note tucked in his coat pocket with a joke Tommy made, a new recipe she'd tried, his favorite coffee brewed stronger in the morning, but he barely looked at her when he said thanks. Something had shifted. Then one evening, Jack didn't come home. Eloan waited with the lamp lit until the moon sat high. Tommy fell asleep on the rug, clutching the wooden horse like a talisman. She stepped outside 3 times to scan the ridge, heart beating harder each time. When Jack finally returned, his face was bruised, his knuckles bloodied, and the collar of his shirt torn. "What happened?" she asked, rushing to him. He brushed past her. "Nothing. You're bleeding." I said it's nothing. The way he said it shut the air right out of her chest. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He wouldn't let her near. Later, she found the cause without asking. Word came down from town. He'd gotten into a fight outside the saloon with Calix Garrison. They say he lost control, said Mrs. Bailey from the general store. Started swinging before Calix even said a word. The Lowen carried the news like a weight. When she asked Jack about it that night, he stood at the window, arms crossed. He said Eliza never should have married me. Said I was a coward, letting strangers raise children that weren't mine. The Lowen stepped forward. He's wrong. Jack's jaw tightened. Maybe not. Maybe I'm coward. Maybe I've been hiding behind this house, behind you. The Lowen's voice cracked. What are you trying to say? Jack turned, and for the first time in weeks, he looked directly at her, but his eyes were tired, worn from battles inside himself. I don't know what I'm doing, Lowen. You and Tommy, you deserve something whole. I'm not whole. That night, she didn't sleep. She lay awake in the cot, staring at the beams overhead. She'd come here with nothing, and somehow found a life that mattered, and now it was slipping through her fingers like sand. Over the next days, the distance between them grew. Jack became a shadow in his own home. He still fixed a fence, still cut wood, but when Tommy asked him a question, he barely answered. Lowen saw it eating the boy up. Confusion hurt. He didn't understand why Jack wouldn't smile at him anymore, why he left the room when Lowen laughed. And then came the letter. It arrived folded tight, sealed with a crude wax stamp. Lowen opened it on the porch. It was from a cousin in Kansas she hadn't spoken to in years. Her mother was ill, failing. Time was short. She read the letter twice, then once more. And then she folded it again and tucked it in her pocket. She didn't mention it to Jack. That night, she sat beside Tommy as he drew on a scrap of paper. A crude picture, a stick figure with long braids, another tall one with a hat, and a small one in between. She stared at it for a long time. When Jack entered the room and saw it, he stopped in his tracks. I'm not his father, he said flatly. Lowen looked up slowly. You don't have to be. You just need someone who stays. I don't know if I can stay, he whispered. The next morning, Lowen told him about the letter. He didn't speak for a while. Then finally he said, You should go. I haven't decided. You should. Her throat tightened. You want me to? He didn't answer. The days that followed were quiet. Too quiet. Jack moved through the house like a ghost. Tommy began retreating again, sleeping with the lamp lit, eyes darting to the door like he was waiting for one of them to vanish. Then came the storm, a late spring thunderstorm, fierce and fast. It struck just before sunset, wind tearing across the ridge like a scream. Lowen ran outside to pull down laundry. Jack was in the barn. She saw Tommy at the window, watching with wide eyes. A crack split the sky, and the roof of the barn shuddered. Lowen screamed. She raced across the yard, wind slapping her face, rain soaking her through. The barn door was jammed. She shoved and pulled until it gave way. Inside, Jack was on the ground, pinned beneath a fallen beam. I'm fine, he growled. Get out of here. But she didn't leave. She screamed for help, though no one could hear. She grabbed the lever, pushed with all her weight. Wood creaked. Her arms shook. And then, somehow, it gave. Jack crawled free, wincing. They stumbled out together, soaked, coughing, bleeding. The barn behind them groaned under the weight of rain. Back in the house, she wrapped his ribs while he hissed in pain. You didn't leave, he said through gritted teeth. No, she whispered, and neither did you. That night, something broke open between them, not in words, but in how she tucked the blanket around him, how he didn't pull away. When the storm passed, Jack sat her down. I didn't want to push you away, he said. I just didn't know how to let you stay. Loving someone again, it feels like tempting fate. Like if I get close, I'll lose everything all over again. Lowen's voice trembled. I'm not Eliza, and Tommy isn't Hope, but we're here, and we're not asking you to forget. We're asking you to let us in. He didn't speak, but he reached for her hand. It was the first time in weeks he'd touched her. The fear still lived in him. Lowen knew it would for a long time, but fear could sit beside hope. It had to, because she couldn't build a life on silence again. Neither could he. The next morning, Lowen told Jack she needed to go to Kansas, just for a while, to say goodbye to her mother, to make peace with where she came from. He didn't argue. But when she packed her bag, Tommy clung to her leg. "I don't want you to go," he whispered. She knelt in front of him. "I have to, but I'll come back. You promise?" She hugged him tight. "I promise." Jack drove her to the edge of the ridge in the wagon. They didn't speak much, but just before she climbed down, he said, "I was wrong. You didn't just heal this house. You healed me." Eloin smiled softly. "Then hold on to it while I'm gone." As the wagon rolled toward town, Eloin looked back once. Jack stood in the road, one hand on Tommy's shoulder, the wind tugging at his coat. And though her heart ached, she knew this wasn't the end. It was the space before a new beginning, one where pain and love would live side by side. And she was willing to fight for both. The train from Kansas arrived just after sunset. Eloin stepped off the last coach with her bag clutched tight and her eyes scanning the quiet platform. She hadn't written ahead, hadn't warned them she was coming. Part of her hadn't been sure she'd return at all. But as she looked toward the dusky ridge line beyond town, the one she used to stare at from Jack's porch, her heart settled. She was ready now, not just to go back, but to face what was waiting. The weeks away had been heavy. Her mother, thinner than Eloin remembered, had died holding her hand in a house that smelled of medicine and dust. There were no grand final words, just a soft smile, a touch on her daughter's cheek, and then stillness. But in that silence, Eloin found a kind of peace. She mourned, yes, but the ache wasn't sharp like it had been with her brother. Maybe because this time there was closure. Or maybe because she finally knew what it meant to go back, say goodbye, and walk away without guilt. Now she stood once more in the town she'd quietly begun to call home. Her boots crunched over the packed dirt as she passed shuttered windows and sleepy storefronts. Every light in town seemed dimmer, save one, the general store's lantern still swinging in the wind. It felt familiar, grounding, but the real test waited at the end of the road, beyond the ridge. When she reached the house, she paused at the edge of the porch. The steps had been sanded smooth. A new swing hung from the overhang. Someone had trimmed the shrubs. The home she'd left looked cared for, lived in. Jack opened the door before she could knock. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at her like a man waking from a long sleep, afraid the dream might vanish. "You came back," he said finally, voice low. "I told Tommy I would." Jack nodded, stepping aside to let her in. The moment she crossed the threshold, a rush of memory filled her chest. The scent of cedar and ash, the worn floorboards beneath her feet, the quiet, watchful stillness of this house that had once held only grief, but now carried echoes of something else. Tommy ran in from the back room, his face lighting up as he skidded to a stop. He threw his arms around her waist and didn't let go. "I drew you things," he said into her coat, "so you wouldn't forget us." "I didn't forget," she whispered, "not even for a second." Dinner that night was quiet, but not heavy. Jack had cooked, or tried to. The bread was burned and the beans were tough, but Eloin ate every bite. Because it mattered. Because it meant he hadn't shut down this time. He'd stayed open. After Tommy went to bed, Eloin and Jack stood on the porch. The stars above looked different somehow, closer, quieter. Eloin pulled the red scarf from her pocket and wrapped it back around her neck. Jack noticed. "I should have told you not to leave," he said. "No," she replied. "You needed to face it here, and I needed to face it there." He turned to her, voice rough. "Eloin, I keep thinking about that night. Why I went into Hope's room with you. I haven't stepped inside since you left." "You should," she said, "but not for me. For yourself." So they went together. The room hadn't changed. Same folded blanket, same row of toys. But this time, Jack didn't freeze. He walked to the shelf, lifted a small rag doll, and sat on the bed. "I never said goodbye," he murmured. "Not really. I just kept pretending they'd walk through that door one day. Eliza and Hope. Like if I didn't move anything, time would bring them back." Eloin knelt beside him. "But they're not coming back." "I know." His voice cracked. "And I hated myself for still being alive when they weren't. I hated the sound of my own laugh. I hated waking up without their voices." Eloin waited. Jack took a long breath. But then you showed up, cleaning my house like you were fixing the pieces of me, one sweep at a time. And that boy, I don't even know when I started to love him. I just did. The Lowen's eyes stung. You think I don't know what I've done? He said. I push you away. I let that boy think I'd leave like everyone else in his life. I was so scared of losing someone again. I nearly ruined the only thing that made life worth living. Lowen touched his hand. You didn't ruin it. Not yet. I don't want to lose you, he said, finally. Not you. Not him. I'm tired of hiding from ghosts. I want something real. Lowen leaned her forehead against his. Then stop hiding. And in that quiet, broken room, where memories once ruled, Jack finally cried. Not just for his wife and daughter, but for all the years he spent frozen, afraid to move forward. The next day, he and Lowen took Tommy to the ridge. They stood where Jack used to cut wood alone, where Lowen had once watched him from a distance. Now they stood together. Jack knelt beside Tommy. I know I've been quiet. I know I haven't said it like I should. But I care about you, son. You're not mine by blood, but you're mine. Tommy blinked, confused. You want me to stay? I want you to stay forever, Jack said. If you'll have me. The boy didn't answer. He just threw his arms around Jack's neck and held on. Later that week, Jack pulled an old trunk down from the attic. Inside were Eliza's things, letters, photographs, a music box. He opened it beside Lowen. I've never shown these to anyone, he said, but I think she'd want me to. Lowen read the letters late into the night. In one, Eliza had written about her fears, how she didn't want Jack to lock himself in grief if anything happened to her. Find someone who sees you, the letter read. Someone who helps you laugh again. Jack whispered the words aloud, and then he looked at Lowen and smiled. The breakthrough wasn't one moment. It was 1,000 quiet ones. It was Jack finally putting Hope's blanket in a chest, not out of forgetting, but out of respect. It was Tommy sleeping through the night without the lamp. It was Lowen waking up and finding Jack already at the stove, burning eggs, but trying anyway. They'd all been broken, but slowly, carefully, they were stitching something whole. And those scars still lingered. Though grief still visited in the soft hours before dawn, they no longer lived in silence. They lived in something stronger. They lived in love. Spring leaned into summer, and the hills around the house turned green with life. Wildflowers pushed through the soil near the porch, and bees worked in silence, carrying on without permission. The rhythm of the days became something close to peace. Slow mornings with Tommy curled under Lowen's arm. Lazy afternoons where Jack taught him how to split kindling without hurting his fingers. The pain didn't disappear, it just grew quieter, softer, like a song fading into a better one. Lowen stood at the edge of the yard one morning, apron dusted with flour, a mug in her hand. She watched Jack crouch beside Tommy as they tried to repair the broken wagon wheel for the third time that week. Jack's patience had grown in a way that surprised her. He didn't raise his voice now when the boy got it wrong. He laughed. He ruffled his hair, and when their eyes met across the yard, the look he gave her wasn't one of guarded hesitation. It was full of quiet trust, of something deeper that neither of them had rushed, but both had chosen every day. That evening, Lowen stepped out of the bath, wrapped herself in her cotton robe, and walked barefoot across the wooden floor. The windows were cracked open. The scent of the land drifted in, pine, earth, the last breath of sun-warmed grass. She heard the front door open, then soft footsteps behind her. She didn't turn around. Jack came up behind her, not touching, just standing close enough that she could feel his breath at her shoulder. You look peaceful, he said quietly. She closed her eyes. I feel peaceful. He waited a beat, then asked, Can I hold you? She turned, nodded once, and let him. His arms wrapped around her like a home she'd been building room by room since the first day she stepped inside this place. No words passed between them as they stood there. Just warmth. Just the sound of the wind outside, the settling of the house, the steady beat of his heart against hers. Later, In the hush of the bedroom, Eloin let him trace the line of her spine with rough fingertips. They undressed slowly, like they were still memorizing each other. There was nothing rushed in it. No fear, no need to hide the scars. Jack kissed the hollow of her collarbone and whispered her name like it was something sacred. And when they finally came together, it wasn't a firestorm. It was steady, certain, like rain soaking dry earth, healing, not drowning. Afterward, Jack held her close. One hand on her ribs, one cupped around the back of her head. She rested her cheek on his chest, listening to his breath as it rose and fell. I used to think love was something that only came once, he said. But I was wrong. Eloin didn't reply right away. Then she whispered, so did I. The next morning, Tommy came running in from the barn, cheeks pink from sun and excitement. Ma, he shouted, though the words still caught her by surprise every time. There's a fox behind the coop. I think she's building something. Jack grinned. Then we'd better leave her be. Eloin stood at the stove, frying eggs, sunlight streaking through the window beside her. For the first time in years, she realized she wasn't waiting for something to go wrong. She wasn't looking over her shoulder, listening for a door to slam, a footstep to vanish. She was just here, with them. Later that week, they rode into town as a family. Tommy perched between them on the wagon bench, pointing out every dog and wagon wheel and goat like it was a miracle. People watched them, some with curiosity, a few with small smiles. One woman at the general store leaned over and said, "He looks just like you, Jack." Jack laughed. In the troublemaking, maybe, they didn't need to explain who they were. Not anymore. They just were. That night, Eloin took out the photograph Jack had shown her, the one of Eliza and Hope. She dusted off the frame and placed it on the mantel beside a new one. Tommy sitting on Jack's shoulders, both of them laughing, so hard their eyes were nearly closed. Eloin stared at both pictures for a long time. Then she whispered, "Thank you," not sure if she meant it for the past or for what had come after. Weeks turned into months. The garden grew wild with tomatoes and onions. The porch swing became Tommy's favorite place to nap after chores. Jack built a chicken coop with him, though it took twice as long with all the questions the boy asked. And one night, while the crickets sang and Eloin curled up beside Jack on the porch, he reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a simple silver band. "I don't need a preacher to tell me what I already know," he said. "You're my home. You always have been." She stared at the ring, then at him. Her voice caught. "Yes." He slipped it on her hand, then pressed his forehead to hers. There was no crowd, no church bells, no fancy dress. Just two people who had been broken once, standing steady together now, under a sky wide enough to hold all they had lost and all they had found. And as the stars blinked quietly above them, Eloin thought that maybe some stories didn't need an ending, just a place to begin again.